potent advice, and inspiration from real self-made millionaires. Welcome to The Eventual Millionaire with your host, Jamie Masters.
Welcome to Eventual Millionaire. I'm Jamie Masters, and today on the show, I finally have Dorie Clarks. She's been on my radar for years and years and years. I've heard her name 1,000 times. She's coming out with a brand new book called The Long Game, which we all need to know. You can check her out at DorieClark.com. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Jamie, thank you so much. I feel the same about you, and I'm so glad to finally be connecting.
And this book is so freaking needed. I talk to my clients all the time about short-term versus long-term, and you wrote the book on it. So tell us a little bit more why you went down this lane.
Well, I think it's probably for a similar reason to what you're talking to your clients about, because certainly when I was starting my business 15 years ago, I realized very quickly and with a growing sense of alarm that there were things that I would need to do in order to somehow raise my profile or differentiate myself in the marketplace. And I started to do them, and it just felt like, wow, is this not working, or is this not working yet? And why can't I tell the difference? And it was so frustrating. And I just, I kind of muscled through it. And for a lot of us, when we're undergoing the gauntlet of entrepreneurship, we often feel like, oh, well, maybe that's just me. But 5 years ago, I started, running this online course and community, and I was working with people who were doing very similar things. And at this point now, we have 600 plus people who have gone through the program. And I began to see this real cross section where it wasn't just me, it was almost everybody. And there's this sort of gulf that we have to surmount on the path to growing the business we want. And there can be a lot of low points. It can really be discouraging. And in the long game, I wanted to try to create a framework so that good people with good ideas are able to persist longer and to understand what is coming down the pike so that they actually can get to the other side and get the rewards that they want.
100%. It's like spinning plates, right? And you're like, I only have so much energy. And then they all start crashing. And then you just think you suck as an entrepreneur. And then you throw your hands up, right? Tell me a little bit more about the framework.
Yeah. Well, ultimately, in the long game, I break it down into three key parts, which is kind of how I think about the journey. The first part is about creating more white space, because certainly I think all of us these days understand that one of the big barriers is, I don't think there's anybody that thinks, thinking long term, that's a bad idea. Like, we all know we should be doing it, but the problem is in the execution, because we are so stuffed to the gills with all of the short term things we have to do. So step one is figuring out how we can strategically clear out more white space so we can do the thinking we need. Number two is getting clear on the right goals for us. How do we focus on the right things and make sure we're actually headed in the right direction that we want to be and that we think we are? And then finally, the third part is what I call keeping the faith, because inevitably on the path, if we're pursuing a meaningful enough goal, a long-term enough goal, it is far more likely than not that there will be some detours and some disruptions and obstacles. And we have to understand how to persist and how to get around them so we don't give up too soon.
Okay. Yeah. Because it's like entrepreneurs rev their engine so much and then they burn out. And then they're like, well, I can't see the results from it because I haven't stuck with it long enough. Because every entrepreneur that I've worked with ever wants it done yesterday. Like, can I have it just be done yesterday? And that level of thinking is so hard when you're looking at the long game and going, yeah, but I'd like it sooner. So how do you get over that mental piece of wanting it all done yesterday, but pre-planning for the future?
Yeah, it is a terrible human conundrum, isn't it?
Seriously.
I mean, and the truth is, there's good elements to this. This is, not saying that short-term thinking is universally a bad thing. Sometimes it's quite important and quite relevant. When everybody was having to pivot during the pandemic and, okay, that whole 2020 plan, that's not going to be a thing. Short-term thinking is great then, because we need to dive in and roll up our sleeves and make things happen. But I think the most important part to recognize is short-term thinking is great up to a point, but we cannot live our lives that way. We have to recalibrate. We have to go back to more balance by emphasizing long-term thinking so we actually can end up in the place we want to end up. We can't always be reactive. So ultimately, when it comes to this sort of sense of impatience, I have it too. I think just about every entrepreneur does. But in the book, I talk about a concept that I call strategic patience, because regular patience has really never done it for me. I feel like when people talk about regular patience, it's more kind of like a just, shut up. Like, can you please stop? It's like, just be patient. And that kind of like wish fulfillment thing, like, oh, just lean back and magic things will happen. This never sufficed for me. I wanted to actually have some agency and some control. And so strategic patience is my version of this, which is understanding that, yes, okay, we get it. We are making peace with the fact that things might take a while. Things might take longer than we want them to. And that is frustrating, but it is reality. So, okay, we'll cope with that. But the strategic part is you're not just sitting back and eating bonbons and making a Pinterest board. You are doing things. You are creating a hypothesis. You are testing the hypothesis. You are pivoting. You are observing. To me, that is strategic patience.
I'm so grateful that you labeled that, because when I'd say patience to anybody, they're like, yeah, but you don't understand me. Like that's not an innate capability of mine, right? Like, and so you're like, but it's not that. It's not the normal way we see patience. It's totally something different, which makes, I think, all entrepreneurs have a little sigh or a deep breath right now where we're like, oh, it's for a reason and it's for more ROI later. And that makes a huge difference. The thing that I have a question on, though, is everyone goes, well, how do I actually get more white space? Because we're in a culture of hacking time as much as humanly possible and packing in everything, right? So we don't even necessarily want space. We feel good that we're busy. But how can we get more white space in our lives?
Yeah, that is the important question. And so in the long game, I actually have multiple chapters devoted to this question, because without it, most of the other stuff is not going to work, right? We just don't have the mental bandwidth to even go there. So there are 4 questions, Jamie, that as one of the frameworks, one of the ways that I begin to suggest this, that I use personally and that I propose that might be helpful for other people. And so just briefly, in case they are, whenever I am confronted with some kind of an option, an opportunity, I mean, obviously, right? If it's terrible, we say no. If it's great, we say yes. The problem so often for us as entrepreneurs is the middling opportunities, because we kind of talk ourselves into things, right? It's like, well, it's not paid, but it could be good exposure. These like magic things where we try to convince ourselves. So if it's a middle kind of situation, if it's like, a 4 to an 8, let's say, what I have learned to ask myself is the following 4 questions. So number 1, what is the total commitment? It is so easy to con ourselves in the moment into thinking, well, it's just an hour to do this webinar. And you and I know that it takes, an hour to make the slides. And then they want to have 3 freaking planning calls. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay. You have to be real. You have to say, do I want to devote 4 hours to this project? That's number 1. Number 2 is, what is the physical and emotional cost of saying yes to this? Because so often, this was true for me for a long time, it was always this question of like, well, literally, does it fit in my calendar? That is not the right question. If you have been running yourself ragged, if you have been traveling, if you have been really overextended on a project, you are going to be less in a position to be able to do something. So think about the overall cost physically and emotionally to yourself. Number 3, as entrepreneurs, we should never forget about the opportunity cost. It is not a question of, should I do this or should I not do this? It is a question of, should I do this thing or should I literally do anything else in the world that takes that amount of time? That could be the gym, that could be your family, that could be writing your book, whatever it is. And lastly, would I feel bad in a year if I did not do this? Because honestly, most things just kind of fade into noise. There's a few things, okay, maybe it's your best friend's wedding. You probably feel bad, but most things you're not going to feel bad saying no to.
We need this so badly. Like when you said mental bandwidth at the beginning, I think people don't even understand that the level of stuff they have in their brain is not conducive to all the creative ideas, right? That they could be having. Like you said, if I choose to do this webinar, well, that just comes to me. So it's easier just to say yes than to actually come up with something myself strategically. That's probably a million times better and will get me there farther and faster. But it's just easier to just receive instead of trying to think about what we need to do. So how do we figure out what that strategic plan is? Because some entrepreneurs are not very strategic, they would assume, right?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think everyone has the capacity to be strategic, but you're right that everybody has sort of natural predispositions. I mean, I think about, and it's sort of weird, right? It's not like the kind of things that you really like get tested for, and it's like, oh yes, I know this for a fact. You discover it about yourself in the doing. Like I have this one friend who is so good at titles. Like she can come up with a title for anything, and it's so magical to watch her. And meanwhile, I'm proud. I came up with a title for the long game. The title and the subtitle, how to be a long-term thinker in a short-term world. I was so proud of myself. I literally was trying for like a year to come up with it because every single one of my previous books, I literally just let the publisher pick it because I'm like, I don't know. So yeah, we all have the thing where we have to work at it. We can get better, but it's challenging. So if you are someone who does not feel like you are, quote unquote, naturally strategic, and you do need to work on it a little bit, I think there's a few things. One is I always like to beat the drum on this, and I know that you're a believer in this as well, about developing for ourselves a robust peer community. I think that is really important to have other people who not only are your boosters, and that's important too, but also you need to have people who understand your field as well and can provide targeted advice about, this is a good idea, this is a bad idea, as compared to your mom being like, you're amazing, sweetheart, which, is his own good thing. But I think that's part of it. I also think sometimes we overcomplicate things, right? When we think about strategy, we don't necessarily, where I see a lot of people go wrong is they say, well, I can't come up with a 20-year plan because I don't know how I would accomplish it. Good. You don't need to know how to accomplish a 20-year plan. If it is a fool's errand to imagine that you can predict how to accomplish something 20 years from now. Like the world could be like underwater. I don't freaking know. Like there's a lot of things that can happen. Really, it is about identifying some kind of like a vision, a North Star you're working toward. And don't figure out the 20-year plan, figure out what the next step is. So it's just sort of ideating, like, what do you want your life to look like? I will tell you my 20-year plan. I want to be a United States ambassador. Do I currently have a bead on how to do that? Not really. I think what I actually need to do is raise millions of dollars for a person who wins the presidency. Who is that going to be in 20 years? Damned if I know. But, we figure things out as we are moving toward them.
See, I don't think a lot of the entrepreneurs we work with are lacking that vision, right? But they assume in order to pick that vision, they need to know how to get there. I love that you shared the story where you're like, it's way the heck out there and I've got no clue. Because most people won't admit that. They're like, oh, well, just so you know, I've got a 20-year plan on how we do this. And almost all entrepreneurs that I've ever met don't have anything even close to that. Like you said, you can't. The target ends up moving. I mean, with the pandemic, we never would have been able to predict it. We recalibrated absolutely everything after that. And so knowing that you're sort of on uneven ground all the time anyway, it makes you feel a little bit better about not necessarily knowing, A to Z. What do you say for the people though that do like to think longer term strategically, but get in their own heads about the right way to do something?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to lower the stakes and lower the bar on almost anything, right? Like sometimes, speaking of webinars, like I'll be doing a webinar and people will type these like frantic questions into the chat box and they'll be like, but what if I pick the wrong goal? And it's like, so you know what? Change it. It's okay. Like it's like not the end of the world. The big thing, this is a drum that I beat a lot in the long game. We all know, and we probably are applying this honestly in our businesses. I mean, everybody at this point in the entrepreneurial ecosystem is down with, lean startup methodology and minimum viable product and all that. You're probably doing it with your A/B testing of your landing pages, right? But you're not doing it probably for your own career. let's apply the lessons that we know and that we have internalized for our business. Let's turn it back on ourselves. You only get into problems if you overextend yourself and you put too much on the table and you lose a bet. The way I like to think about it, if you go to a casino and you lose $1, are you going to say, oh, I failed? Like, nobody notices. Nobody cares that you lost $1. The point is, don't put down $100,000 on a bet that you are totally unsure you're going to win, or probably you're not going to win, right? That's a terrible idea. Put down a bunch of $1 bets. You can, it's like venture capital. You can lose 900 of them, and it's not a big deal, because the whole point is not to make $1. The point is to get data so that you can find the one place you put the dollar and it works, and you say, all right, well, I'm putting $100,000 down here, and you have a high degree of confidence that it's going to work.
It's a feedback loop, people. It's scientific method over and over and over again, because even if the guru tells you that this is the right way to do something, they're making that up to you, right? Like, yeah, they got data and now they're saying it worked, and maybe you listen to it 5 years later and now it doesn't work, and you're like, hey, and you blame it's forever moving. And I don't think people really understand that. And the good news is, with the feedback loop, like you're saying, is that they're going to learn no matter what it is. So yes. I know we sort of discount, or at least we use the cliche, like, it's never failing, it's learning, but it's true. How do you get to have either your clients or you embody that? Because it's hard. It's easy to say, harder to do.
Yeah. Well, I think that it's just the point about small bets. Like, you literally don't even notice or care if it's small. Like, how does it feel like a failure if you waste an hour? Like, it just doesn't even register. So I think there's ways that we can just take failure off the table. I mean, for me personally, the way that I got the book deal for my first book, it was Reinventing You. And I had 3 book proposals, complete proposals, that I had written before, and they had all gotten turned down. Nobody wanted them. It was very depressing. And, basically the feedback I got is like, you're not famous enough. Go get famous and talk to us later. And like, okay, you assholes. And so I started blogging, reluctantly. I did not want to start blogging, but I'm like, fine, okay, I have to do this. And it turned out, much to my chagrin, oh, they were right, because I could not guess what readers would care about. I thought I could. I couldn't. I'm not that smart. Probably no one's that smart. The way you find out what readers care about is you test things with readers and you see. And so I started writing a bunch of blog posts, and there was one blog post that really took off much more than the others. And it was a piece I did for Harvard Business Review about personal branding and, reinventing your personal brand. And that became a thing. And ultimately, I was able to take it from being a blog post to being an article in the magazine. And then when the magazine piece came out, mind you, this is after I had been fired by my agent because she couldn't sell any of my proposals. 3 different literary agents reached out to me and said, hey, do you want to talk? Do you want to turn this into a book? And I was like, oh, that's what it feels like to be wanted. Okay. And it was because of this testing. But, it's because I wrote a bunch of, 800-word blog posts. That's frankly a lot more economical in terms of my time and energy than writing 3 complete book proposals, which failed, which had been my previous strategy. But I'm curious, Jamie, how do you think about strategic thinking in your own life? Do you have, a 10-year, 20-year plan? Like how does this work for you?
I have so many other follow-up questions for you. No. I have a vision board that I paint that's far out when I go. I have no idea what any of this is going to be or how it will come to fruition. In fact, I have a mind movie where I put white space. Like, this was 5 or 6 years ago. I wanted more white space. Yes. So I took a picture of a calendar with no meetings on it. And I was like, I need this.
Done.
And now I work maybe 10 hours a week. I have a couple meetings. That's about it. Right. Which
Amazing.
Was completely different to my, hustle sort of mode. I can achieve anything and kill myself in the process kind of way. Right. And so I think we discount the need for contemplation time and for, like you said, strategic thinking and sort of going a little bit down that road. Even with my clients, I have them do 3-month plans. And while we're working on the 3-month plan, then we plan the 6 to 12 month plan. And then we see how it goes, because their speed of implementation matters. If somebody can do something in a week and other people take a month or 2 months to do, it's totally different. You can't plan. I used to be a project manager, if you can't tell. I'm like, you put all the things in order. And so, yeah, I only go 3 to 6 months out typically anyway, because it ends up shifting after a little while, right?
I think that makes all the sense in the world. Yeah, absolutely. Like you can have the long range vision, but you can only plan definitively a little ways out. Now, I'm curious, what were the biggest changes? I'm sure there were a lot of changes around the edges, but what were the biggest changes that you made that enabled you to go from the sort of proverbial overstuffed schedule to having all the white space in just 10 hours of work per week?
Enough pain for me. Mine's a different situation. The kid's dad, who I co-parent with, got terminal cancer. And I went, what matters more?
Yes.
Right. And so
function.
Yeah, yes. It was, and I'm stubborn. So I had that little white space thing on my movie forever, but it was like, I would do little things here and there. And then when this happened, I was like, nothing, because I couldn't. And so unfortunately the situation sucks, but you can do, like, I used to be like, well, I can't, I'm a single mom and I've got kids and I've got this and I've got that. I would use all those excuses. And when push comes to shove, you can do anything that you want to.
Right. That's really
I love
the
that
key.
you turned everything on me. Wait, I have a question for you. Because the 3 proposals, that's a lot. Those aren't $1 bets to me. When you fail 3 times on proposals, like that's a huge chunk, especially just in mindset and defeatedness, right?
Yeah.
And now you have a bazillion books. And let me say, one of your books was rated #1 leadership book of the year by Inc. magazine. So to go from 3 failed proposals to Inc. magazine's #1 book of the year is kind of a ridiculous trajectory, but you could have quit at book proposal 2 or book proposal 3, and you never would have achieved that. So that's not, to me, $1 bets. Those are pretty heavy.
Oh yeah. That was before I learned how to do things better. Yeah. I'm not saying do that. I'm saying don't do that.
That's awesome. So what would you have done in hindsight? Because you didn't want to write a blog and you had to get pushed into it too, right?
Right. Well, what I would recommend for other people is to start at that point and write the blogs, because the 3 failed book proposals really didn't give me much data aside from I wasn't famous. Oh, surprise. I didn't know that. So what did give me data was writing a bunch of different blog posts, because you're trying, a blog takes you an hour, 2 hours, whatever to write, and you're able to create a lot of them and see what resonates. So, I mean, that is a much better strategy. Yes. So the whole premise in the long game is that I am writing about things. Certainly I interviewed a bunch of people and sharing their best strategies, but I'm also curating it through my own lens of what I've learned over the past 15 years in business, and, certainly plenty of mistakes along the way.
Why is it that we seem to have, because I work with a lot of entrepreneurs, I have a lot of entrepreneurial friends, we are stubborn as all heck, right? Even when I think about you going like, oh, I don't want to write a blog. Like, I just don't want to, right? And the amount of pushing that sometimes has to happen, right? In order for us to get to where we need to go. It's not just like, oh, this is magic and it's a small step and I take it, right? Like, how can we get people to not be so stubborn, or at least lower their level of resistance to testing and trying new things that they might be averse to?
Yeah. There's we do have to talk ourselves into things sometimes. I think part of it is ways of understanding that oftentimes there are other routes to a goal. I mean, I think most entrepreneurs, you want to build a business, you want the business to be successful. That's a pretty universal desire. We may be averse based on personality, based on previous experience or whatever, to certain methods of it. And actually, I think that's fine. Like, I get questions sometimes from people that are, thinking about doing coaching or courses with me or whatever. And they're like, but I don't write. I don't like to write. Do I have to write to do it? And I write a lot. But also I used to be a former journalist. Like, that's what I enjoy. That's fine. But, I very clearly tell people, I'm like, no, that does not have to be the thing. What is the thing? We need to dial it back one more step. It's not that you have to write. It's that you have to share ideas. That is the part that's mandatory. You cannot be a thought leader, you cannot be a recognized expert in your field if you don't have any ideas or you're not sharing those ideas so other people can hear them. That is the price of admission. But the way that you share those ideas, that is open for debate. And if you hate writing, fine, don't force yourself. It's okay. It's not like there's a law you have to do it. You can give speeches, you can do podcasts, you can do videos, you could whatever. If it's really good, I guess you could do like a slide share or something. But there's a lot of methods to it. But find the underlying principle and then look for a different way to meet that goal.
Yeah. And starting though, like I blogged for 6 months. I feel like you were telling my story. I blogged for 6 months. I hate writing. But everybody told me to blog. So I blogged and it kind of sucked. And then I started a podcast and it was, a million times easier and better because that's my thing. And I would never have known that that was my thing until I went down the path of going, this is not my thing. Because I wouldn't have come up with a podcast without doing all the other pieces, even though, but sticking with something for 6 months in a culture of TikTok right now, right? Like it's just very different. So 6 months of trying to get feedback and not feeling like you're successful at something sucks. So what do you say for people's mindset of like feeling like things are going super, super slow when they're focused on more of the long game?
Yeah. Well, I think this, going back to a point we were talking about previously, this is where having a knowledgeable group of friends you trust is very valuable, because if you genuinely do trust their opinion and you make it clear that you want honest feedback, we are not good judges when we are in the thick of things, right? Our judgment goes a little bit out the window. And, depending on the moment or depending on our nature, we probably, vacillate pretty wildly between, oh, I'm just going to keep hanging on and we're almost there. We're just around the corner. And then, 5 minutes later, it's like, it'll never work. It'll never happen for me. And, it's just like, oh, which is it? So you need people to reflect back and to give you some guidance about it. But also a piece that's really important is very few people take the time to research upfront what has happened for other people. Like we sort of make these assumptions like, oh, well, this person gave this speech and then it went viral and then all the things happened. And, you don't understand the mechanism behind it. You haven't really looked into it. And, it's very useful to understand. And yes, there are outliers, but in general, there are premises that we should be aware of. Like in the business world, if somebody's a lawyer and you want to make partner at the law firm, generally it takes about 7 or 8 years to become a partner at a large law firm. If you somehow think you're going to make partner in 3 years, I'm not saying it's not going to happen, but I'm going to say it would be extremely surprising in the history of the universe if that was how it happened. And, okay, if you know something I don't and like you bring in $1 billion contract to your law firm, then great. But mostly that's not going to happen. And similarly, in your entrepreneurial field, if you look at your, idols / competitors or whatever, we need to see like, all right, well, what did that arc look like? How many episodes did Jamie have of her podcast before she hit X number of monthly downloads? Like, these are the pieces of data that are actually going to be valuable to you as you think about what is a rational goal.
Yes. Okay. I love talking to you. Because things aren't realistic. And unfortunately, because of marketing also, people are like, oh, you can be profitable in a month and blah, 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 right? Like there's a lot of things being touted when you actually look at realistically what has happened for other people. It is never the overnight success that we are sold. And I think that's where the dichotomy kind of comes in too, because we're like, I know, but so-and-so started a podcast like this. You know what I mean? Even my good friend John Dumas, we went to high school together, right? And everyone's like, he was an overnight success. I was like, no, he was not. He worked his butt off for many, 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 many months and had a team before, you know what I mean? And it's easy to just sort of see the head above the water being like, I'm great now. You know what I mean? Instead of actually paying attention to what was realistic for people. But we don't like waiting. So strategic patience is something we all have to work on, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So how do you work on strategic patience? Like, because you've been in the game for 15 years. So you took a lot of experiential learning lessons, right? So somebody who's a little bit newer, how can they test out their strategic patience? What are they supposed to be doing if they keep going back into, oh crap, I have no patience whatsoever?
Well, one of the things that I often think back to as during the process where I was writing the long game is a piece that sort of inspired me was just over a number of years, a lot of coaching calls that I would have with my executive coaching clients. And we'd hop on our Zooms and they'd say, they'd give me the update about what they've been doing the last few weeks. And then they'd say, so what now? What next? And like that was always the question. And I just felt like, the meanest person in the world because I'd have to tell them, I'm like, um, you should keep doing the thing you're doing. That's what's next. It's like, like every 2 weeks they somehow wanted like a new strategy, like, and now it's time for vlogging, like I'd sort of unveil the thing. And it's like, no, actually, the strategy that we decided on like 6 months ago, do that.
Yes. Keep
and
going.
and they were just like, oh, really? Keep doing? I'm like, yes, keep doing that. But, it's, I think, God willing, I hope that was helpful for them because so often the tendency are always, this is true for all of us. We kind of look for the magic bullet. Like we sort of half understand there's not a magic bullet, and then we keep looking for the magic bullet. Like, oh, but now if I do this, and again, sometimes there's like a crazy miracle, but mostly it's slogging, and mostly it's just being a good person who is persistent at doing something well. I mean, in my book Entrepreneurial You, where I wrote about John Lee Dumas and a number of different people. One of the folks that I profiled, who you probably know as well, is Jordan Harbinger, a fellow podcaster, and he told me, the thing about Jordan, he started podcasting in like 2006 or 2007. Most people had no idea what a podcast was. They certainly didn't even know how to find them. And he said that he looked at his statistics once, like he figured out how to find them, and he looked it up. And he was like, he saw basically that like 3 people had listened to it. And then he said he proceeded to not look at his statistics again for 7 years. And he just kept making episodes anyway. And I love it because that is really what we need to do. At the end of the day, we have to just be running our own race and come up with a strategy and execute it. And I think part of the issue with strategic patience as well, we often, at least a part of us, is kind of like looking for the big score, like, oh, the 1,000,000 downloads or whatever. Well, it's probably going to take a while. And so we have to find a way to make the activity meaningful for us, even while we're doing it. And even if we never get to the 1,000,000 downloads, because that's what will enable us to do it. And it can be different goals. It could be the self-mastery of just learning how to do a new thing. It could be that you are interviewing people and you like networking, and this is a great way to, it's a great vehicle to meet new people. It could be a way that you think about doing professional development because you're talking to cool people and you're asking them all the questions you want, whatever the motivator is. But you have to find a short-term motivator to con yourself into playing the long game.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Because like aligning with your strength and actually enjoying the journey. That's the other cliche, right? Enjoying the journey. But literally, I hate writing. If you made me write a blog forever, I would just be gritting my teeth and going, this sucks forever, right? It's totally different than actually trying to at least enjoy what you're doing, because there's no way you'll stick with it for longer. And you have to. Even though we don't necessarily want to. How do you figure out your strengths, though? Like, especially for somebody like you knew writing beforehand if you were a journalist, but you've worked with a lot of people also. How do they figure out what actually can give them that short-term joy so they can stick with it long enough?
Well, I don't necessarily know that it's about strengths per se. I mean, I even having been a journalist, I look back on my early blog posts that I wrote, and nowadays I look at them and I'm like, that wasn't that good. I mean, it wasn't the worst thing in the world. Like, I was at least literate, but like I had not found my quote unquote editorial voice. So I think most of us start not that great at different things. I think the question is less about strengths and it's more about enjoyment. It's more about what do you find pleasurable enough or interesting enough that you will be willing to persist at it long enough to be good at it.
I love that. Yes, because otherwise it's dumb. And then you hate your job or your business or your life and you're never going to make money or stick with it long enough to be able to make money on what you want to do also. But did you always know that you wanted to be a writer?
I mean, I always liked writing, so that was sort of a piece of it, but there were different things that I wanted to do. Really what I wanted to do out of school was go into academia. So I got a master's degree and then I applied to doctoral programs and I thought I would just be a professor, but I got turned down by all the doctoral programs, so I had to find something else to do. So journalism was actually my fallback job because I'm like, well, I could write, I can write and like think about ideas doing this. So that was sort of the plan B from the failed career as the academician.
My face is still in awe because like Inc. magazine voted your book the #1 book of the year. And you're like, it was my fallback, right? Like we never know what life is going to hand us for opportunities. Not that you haven't worked your butt off in order to get where you are right now. But like you said, those little pieces at one time and you keep going and keep going and keep going. What's the one thing from this book right now that you really feel like somebody needs to know?
So when it comes to playing the long game, I think that for me, one of the most important things, which was not at all on my radar when I was writing the proposal for this book, which took place entirely before COVID, I actually got the email saying, "Hey, we're going to buy this book," from my editor, February 28th of 2020. And then literally the next day was the first COVID diagnosis in New York City. So this was all happening at a really interesting time. So when I was first envisioning the book, I thought of it as like, oh, Instagram culture and comparison, it's so deleterious. And, we have to be playing the long game and not be so worried about what other people are doing or why am I not succeeding as fast as I want. And as I was writing it, during COVID, I realized there was also something different, which was COVID was sort of a forced detour into short-term thinking. And, as with a lot of things, it's easy once you're doing something for long enough for that to become the new habit or for that to be the new default. Like a lot of people are like, oh my God, I totally forgot how to relate to people, or, things like that.
Yep.
It's like, no. We need to retrain ourselves because it is not a good thing to forget how to talk to people. We need to fix that. And similarly, I think it's very easy, like almost the default, because it ties into human nature, is to default to short-term thinking. But we need to forcibly correct that. I really believe that it is not a way to live. And if we want to have the kind of entrepreneurial careers that I think most of us do, where we accomplish something, we have a vision, we set out to achieve something and we do achieve it, you can really only get there through long-term thinking. So to me, I now view the long game as a kind of corrective to that. It's a way of, of replanting our stake in the ground after COVID and saying, like, take that COVID. Now is the time. There's a new sheriff in town, and I'm going to come up with with the identity and the vision and the goals for myself, and not just react to the circumstances around me.
Yes. If we all get to do that, we will have a better world instead of feeling that reactive, everybody's going craziness, which we've been in for quite a few months now. And
we have.
Yeah. And burnout is real because of that short-term thinking. And so we have to change the game. We have to have the new sheriff. Otherwise, we're going to burn out, and medically we're going to have issues because we can't live like that forever.
Yeah.
Refreshing. Okay. So I'm going to ask the last question. Besides buying your book, because everybody should go get the book, what's one action listeners can take this week to help move them forward towards their goal of $1 million?
Yes. Well, Jamie, I'm going to revert back to a theme that I talked about with my previous book, which is called Entrepreneurial You. The subtitle is Monetize Your Expertise, Create Multiple Income Streams, and Thrive. And so what I want to suggest, if we're thinking about a step that people can take to raise up their incomes to $1 million, one of the things that I feel really strongly about is the importance of creating multiple revenue streams. I got laid off from my job as a journalist. This was sort of a formative experience for me. On September 10th, 2001. And, my job search the next day didn't quite unfold the way that I thought it would. And it was sort of this very geopolitically traumatic reminder that the safe job isn't safe. And, as entrepreneurs, we know that, but also the safe client isn't necessarily safe. And so if we are too over reliant on, one client or frankly, one line of business, it just puts us at existential risk. And I realize that one of the things we have the ability to do as entrepreneurs is to diversify that risk and be thoughtful about it. And so I'm not saying we have to do like a million totally different things. It's not like, oh, you should be a windsurfing instructor and a lawyer and a dog breeder. What I'm saying is that your core IP, the core thing that you do, you can transmit it in different ways. Maybe you do coaching and online courses, or you run a mastermind, or you have a product line or whatever it is, but you kind of come up with different things because there are people out there that are probably interested in what you offer, but they may be interested in it in a different form than it currently comes in. And I like to suggest, we shouldn't overtax ourselves and try to come up with like 10 new things this year. But my challenge to your listeners is to try to come up with one new line, one new, product or offering this year as a way of diversifying your revenue stream.
That's the long-term thinking that you were just talking about, because everybody that got hit by COVID that had one stream and it was really affected by COVID went, oh crap, now what? And you're saying there's all sorts of different ways we can diversify now so we don't find ourselves out on the streets. If something, who knows, happens. You've had crazy bumps in your career. So everybody check out this book. Tell us more about where we can find you online, your blog, and all your books, because you got a lot of books.
Thank you so much, Jamie. Yes. The best place, the central hub, is DorieClark.com. And for folks that are interested in diving in more fully to the long game, of course, you can get the book, which is fantastic. I also have a free long game strategic thinking self-assessment, and folks can get it at DorieClark.com/thelonggame.
Everybody go check that out and find out how strategic you are. Thank you so much for coming on the show today, Dorie. I so appreciate it.
Thanks, Jamie. Great to be here.
Thank you for listening and investing in yourself with your time. I so appreciate it. And if you enjoyed this episode, I would be forever grateful if you would be willing to leave a rating or review in whatever app you use for your podcast. I know that's what really bumps it up in the rankings. And I would so appreciate your time, especially if you've been a long-time listener. But of course, if you like this episode and you're brand new, thank you for being here too. Have an amazing, amazing day.